Guruve Gaura Chanjaya Radhikaya Tadale Krishna Krishna Bhaktaya Tadabhaktaya Namo Namaha Vanchakalpatrubhischa Kripa Sindhuvevacha Patitanam Pavanevyo Vaishnavevyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Shri Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, good morning, devotees. I wanted to do a brief class, not class really, but a brief question and answer period here. I have a long day today, so even though I have quite a few questions that were in the inbox and some in email, I'm just going to take like one thing to deal with for right now, and then perhaps over the next couple of days, depending on the schedule and everything, then we can put the other things out as well for discussion. So today I primarily want to focus on the English translations by our acharyas, especially our Srila Prabhupada, my own Guru Padma, Srila Narayan Goswami Maharaj, and many of our contemporary Guru Varga. They've translated many of the works of our line into English language, and utilizing certain words in English to capture a concept that's presented in Sanskrit language or Bengali language sometimes could be really, really difficult. But both our Srila Prabhupada and all of our contemporary acharyas have done like amazing, obviously empowered work to take concepts and make them viable for our understanding. I had started this video a little earlier and I had to redo it because some technical difficulties had popped up. But anyway, let me stay on track. So I had a discussion the other day with one of, we have our own study group, which I think I mentioned the other day has been going on for quite some time by the kindness and by the great seva of Sriman Bhumipati Prabhu. For over 18 years, he's maintained consistency in having a phone conference in which we all come together and discuss Siddhanta. So it's like a Siddhanta study group, more or less. So anyways, the other night, one of the very, very sweet Didis who comes on to the conference brought up a question. And it kind of it was more of a statement that led into a discussion. And that was regarding the use of the word in the translations of our Srila Prabhupada, spontaneous devotional service. So the question that was generated, it was a whole discussion, but I'm taking out this point because my emphasis this morning is on understanding the context in which certain words are used. So the word spontaneous devotional service, how and under what context Srila Prabhupada was using that word is kind of important to understand. For many, many years, I think myself as well, so many devotees, we garnered that the idea of spontaneous devotional service, right? Because maybe there wasn't such a deep understanding or study at that time of what is Raga Nuga Bhakti, right? So Srila Prabhupada differentiated the Vaidhi Bhakti and Raga Nuga Bhakti by using the term Vaidhi Bhakti. He would often outright use that term and describe it as the practice under rules and regulations. And then he would describe spontaneous devotional service primarily as a way to describe Raga Nuga Bhakti. So if you look in the summary study of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu of our Srila Prabhupada, his book Nectar of Devotion, you'll see the word in there many times. Of course, throughout the writings of Srila Prabhupada, whenever he's brought the subject up, he will use the phrase spontaneous devotional service. So the thing is, what is really meant by the word spontaneous? So to give some idea, an explanation was given that while we are practicing Vaidhi Bhakti, then we are under the guidance, under the impetus to practice by the effect of these rules and regulations. And that is called Vaidhi Bhakti. I'm putting it in a nutshell. And that at a certain point of our maturity in practicing bhakti, we will come to the point of spontaneous practice of bhakti, right? And that is, in this case, being used as a synonym for Raganuga Bhakti, right? Or a translation of Raganuga Bhakti. So now what does the idea spontaneous engender in the mind? Something that's, automatic, something that's born from activities that don't have a, sort of a intellectual component where you have to think about it and so forth. It happens automatically. So for instance, in Sanskrit language, there's a word swabhavi, means that it's natural. So spontaneous was the idea that one morning, example, that we get up and normally we do Mangalarati every day. And normally, just by the nature of the material body and our conditioned life, you wake up in the morning, 4:30, 3:30, whatever your time is, and you're still groggy and tired, so forth. So under Vaidhi Bhakti, this condition is there. But when you come to spontaneous Bhakti, then, just automatically you'll pop up, you'll be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and that's because now you're on the platform of spontaneous devotional service. So obviously I'm kind of going way back to the earlier understandings of what spontaneous devotional service meant. And obviously the whole concept has evolved in the general devotee mundo a little bit deeper. But still, it is not crystal clear for many devotees what is the difference between Vaidhi Bhakti and Raganuga Bhakti. I'm not going to do a whole class on that here. I just want to get a clear conception of what was meant by spontaneous devotional service when it's used by Srila Prabhupada. And so when the word was used, it was to indicate the difference between the practice of Vaidhi and Raganuga. So Raganuga Bhakti, in short, to give clear understanding of what the word spontaneous devotional service was used to indicate, is the practice of following those who have rag in their atma. They are called ragatmik jan. The ragatmik jan refers to the residents of Vrindavan, the eternal associates of Krishna in Vrindavan are called ragatmik jan. It means they have rag in their atma. So what is rag? So there's one verse, Iste Sorasika Raga Paramaveshtata Bhavet Tanmayi Bhavet Bhakti Satra Ragatmakodita. So here's an explanation of what is rag. It means a complete absorption in the object of one's worship with the particular mood one has towards that worshipable objective, right? This is called rag. So atmik means that in the very nature of the residents of Vrindavan, the eternal associates, Mother Yashoda Maharaj, Nanda, Subal, Sridham, Lalita, Vishaka, Rupa, Rakti, Manjari, etc., all the eternal associates of Vrindavan, their Atma. And here the word Atma, just like Mahaprabhu gave the definition of the Atmaram verse, Atma means mind, body, Atma itself. Now in the spiritual realm, there is no difference between those three. In the material world, we have a gross and subtle body, and then there's the Atma existing beyond the gross and subtle body. But in the spiritual world, Jiva Goswami is mentioned in the Paramatma Sandarbha when he's describing the qualities of the Atma. He says, the Atma is Eka Rupa Sarupa Bhava. It means it is uniform in nature. So this means there is no subtle body, gross body, but that there's only the very nature of the Atma itself. And when the Swarup Shakti, the spiritual potency, descends on that Atma, it is completely also unified with that Swarup Shakti, so the spiritual body that it has in the spiritual world is also uniform. There's no separate, subtle, and gross impositions. The pure spiritual body and the Atma are non-different. So Rag Atmic here means the absolute nature of the residents of Vrindavan is composed of their absolute absorption and attachment in service according to their rasa with Sri Krishna. You understand? So they're called Ragatmika Jan. Jan just means people. So those who follow the mood of the eternal associates of Vrindavan, who serve Krishna with this rag that I just described, they are doing anuga or anugamana to those associates. That is called rag anuga. The word anuga means to follow, simply. There's a deeper explanation because anu really means following in anugatya. It means following under the guidance of the eternal associates. Now, to make some clarification here, it does not mean that in the aspirant stage in bhakti that we are following the eternal associates like Maharaj Nanda, Yashoda, Subal, Sridhar, Madhumangal, Lalita, Vishaka, Rupa, Rati, Ramana Manjari. It doesn't mean that we're following like immediately from this platform, we're following there. Right? Because Rupa Goswami has written when he was describing Raganuga Bhakti in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, in that section of Raganuga Sadhana, he mentioned Seva Sarika Rupena Siddha Rupena Chatrihi Tad Bhava Lipsana Karya Vraja Lok Anusarika. That we want to follow the Brajalok, the residents of Braj, right? But he makes the specification between following in Sadak Roop and following in Siddha Roop. So as long as we're in the stage of being practitioners and we have not realized our own Swarup, that means Bhavavast has not come, then we are following the manifestation of the eternal associates as they appear in Gaur Leela. So, if, for instance, one is in the mood by Sambandha Gyan, given at the time of Diksha, in aspiration for following Manjari Bhav, one will follow Rup Manjari and their own Guru, Rupa Sakhi. If you know your Guru's identity, fine. But one will follow their forms in Gaur Leela. So we will follow Rupa Goswami. Or we'll follow our Guru Pada Padma. How they were doing bhajan, how they were practicing, that is what we will follow. Right? We will not imitate the mood of the eternal associates from this platform. So that is the meaning of doing anugamana or anugatya or rag anuga, following the residents of Braj, right? So, Raganuga Bhakti, I'm just giving simple explanation here, I'm not going into detail. This is what it means. And Srila Prabhupada's use of the word spontaneous devotional service indicated this practice. So, it could be a whole nother question of, well, when does that practice begin? What am I doing now? When do I get to that practice? What does it entail, and so forth, so on. That's a whole nother discussion. But just maybe briefly to elucidate and give some clarification, that in our line, there's never really the practice of Vaidhi Bhakti in the sense of the true path of Vaidhi Bhakti. Right? Because in Chaitanya Charitamrita it's written, Sakale Jagater More Vaidhi Bhakti Braja Bhav Poiti Nahi Shakti. So, by the practice of Vaidhi Bhakti, one cannot obtain the moods of Braj. So just put two and two together. If Srila Prabhupada has installed primarily all of the temples of Srila Prabhupada, the installation of the deities of Shri Radha Krishna are there, Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, or even the deities of Krishna and Balaram, which is also Braj, right? if the dominant theme of the objective of our day-to-day worship is related to Vrindavan, obviously, in relation to the verse I just quoted, we cannot be truly following Vaidhi Bhakti. So what is the indication of Vaidhi Bhakti for us who are practicing in this line? So the meaning here is that one has to follow Vidhi. Vidhi means sastric rules and regulations. Shruti Smriti Puranadi Pantratra Vidam Vida Akantaki Hari Bhakti Utpat Yeva Vakalpate. You have to follow some rules and regulations, right? I mentioned the other day, even in Raganuga Bhakti, right? Shravanam Kirtanandani, Vaidhi Bhakti Sudanti too. It is not that nothing is followed. So in Raganuga Bhakti, you don't have to do Mangalarti, you don't have to chant a fixed number of rounds, right? Who will say that Rupa Goswami was not doing Raganuga Bhakti? At the same time, Sankhya Purva Kanama Ghana Nativi, they were chanting a fixed number of rounds, etc. Right? So Raganuga Bhakti does not mean the absence of following Sastra Vidhi. It means there is the focus of following Sastra with a particular intent. Right? And that particular intent, like in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu Bindu, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has written, Shravanam Kirtanandani, Seva Vrajindra Nanda Shah, Seva Prakti Lobena. So, Shravanam Kirtanandani, Abhimano Shah, Vrajindra Nanda Shah. Shravanam Kirtanandani, Abhimano Shah, Vrajindra Nandana, Seva Prakti Lobena. Yes, this verse. So, he's saying here that doing the angas of bhakti like Shravan, Kirtan, etc., right, with the abhiman that I want to obtain the service of Krishna in Braj, right, I have greed for that, that is called Raganuga Bhakti. Now, what is the situation of those who are still in the stages of unfoldment in bhakti from Shraddha to Sadhu Sangha to Bhajana Kriya, Nartana Vritti, then Nishta, then Ruchi? What is their situation? Like, for instance, when Bhakta Joe comes in the door the following morning, though he will attend Mangal Arati and also sing Samsara, Guru Ashtakam, he'll do Tulsi Seva and Tulsi Parikrama, everything. What is he doing? Is it Vaidhi Bhakti or is it Raganuga Bhakti? So, the term used to describe that position is called Raganuga Pravritti. It is the stage where, in following the essential principles through the unfoldment in bhakti from faith to especially ruchi, going through those stages of anishtita bhakti, it is providing impetus and is providing a way of clearing out things that prevent us from really practicing Raganuga in earnest. So it is called Raganuga Pravritti. But because it is not geared towards the attainment of Vaikuntha, it is not truly Vaidhi Bhakti. Right? We are following vidhis. Everyone has to follow vidhis. Right? I don't care what stage you're in, you'll follow rules and regulations. We don't see that our Goswami Varga did not follow Sastra. So there's no question that Raganuga Bhakti or spontaneous devotional service means a point when I don't have to follow Sastra. Right? There are particular things Rupa Goswami Pad has mentioned that in the practice of Raganuga Bhakti, Dwarka, Dhyan, Nyas, other kinds of things which give stimulus to Aishwarya, right? Those things are given up. So I'm being careful here because once I was speaking this to one devotee, and the devotee heard, well, we will not do Dwarka Dhyan, meditation on Dwarka. What? So many verses of Bhagavatam deal with Krishna and Dwarka and so forth and so on. So I had to explain, listen, it doesn't mean that we don't understand Krishna's pastimes in Dwarka. But from what perspective we understand those pastimes is what constitutes the mood of being Raganuga. Right? In other words, there should be some sense of Sambandha Gyan, which is generated at the time that you take Diksha. Gurudev gives some Sambandha Gyan. Right? Jiva Goswami's written that Diksha is a twofold process. That is the giving of Divya Gyan and Shiyate Papanasanam, the destruction of sins and anarthas, or the ability to have them destroyed through the process of bhakti. So, but he's described what was that Divya Gyan. What's the transcendental knowledge that's given? Divya Gyanam, Divya Gyanam, Divya Gyanam, what is this verse? Oh, Divya Gyanam, Yantra Mantre, Bhagavat Swarup Gyanam Tena, Bhagavat Vise Sambandham Gyanamscha. Through the giving of the Diksha mantras, the Divya Gyan that is instilled in those mantras is one, who is my Ishtadev? What is the object of my worship? Secondly, Visesh Sambandha Gyan. The particular mood in which I aspire to worship, that's also given. This is called Sambandha Gyan. And you cannot truly practice bhakti without having Sambandha Gyan. So, with Sambandha Gyan, how will those in this line look at Krishna's Leela in Dwarka? We will look from the perspective, if we're trying to serve the mood of Brijabasis, we will look, what do Brijabasis feel about Krishna's existence in Dwarka? Right? And this is why we're reading Srimad Bhagavatam and trying to understand. When Krishna was being taken by Akrura to Mathura, which then later, due to the influence of Jarasandha and so many other considerations, then Dwarka would be manifest. What was the mood of the Brijabasis at that time? It's described in Canto Srimad Bhagavatam that the gopis who had kept their love hidden, it's called Prachana Mukata, they had kept their love for Krishna deeply hidden in their hearts. When Akrura was taking the chariot and about to leave, Visraja Laja, Ruda Sma Suswaram, right? They gave up, Laja means shyness, they gave up everything and they openly manifest in front of everyone the depth of their love for Krishna. They began singing, Govinda Damo Daramadaveti, Govinda Damo Daramadaveti. And Rudasma means they were crying profusely. And Suswara means, by the nature of swara, means like the notes of music is called swara. So here it says the suswaram, the emotion expressed at that time by them, by their crying and by the swara that came from their voices as they were singing Govinda Damodar Madhavati, was filled with expressions of their love, which were now openly being displayed in front of everyone. So, looking at Krishna's leaving Braj, going to Mathura, going to Dwarka, this kind of mood and perspective is related to Sambandha Gyan. It is not an indication that we should take up a mood like we are gopis or like we are there. This would be called Paka Prakrita Sahajavad. But still, we have to understand bhakti from Sambandha Gyan. We have to apply what was received by Sri Guru at the time of initiation in our day-to-day practice. So again, we are practicing Raganuga Pravritti, the path of unfoldment to truly coming into a position in which we can now practice Raganuga Bhakti in earnest. So what is that time, or what is that level? So it's explained. Tat tat bhava adi madhure shuti diapekshite nasa sastana yuktingscha ta lobat utpatti lakshanam. So it's described that the essential ingredient in the practice of Raganuga Bhakti is lobe or greed. So when does that lobe or greed come? Well, in the stage of ruchi, which I described in this verse, generally lobe arises. When that lobe arises, the ability to appreciate, when you hear Harikatha, the natural sweetness and other emotional content that is inherent in the Harikatha is tasted naturally, without the filter, nasa sastana yuktingscha. It doesn't mean disregarding of sastra here, or sastra yukti, which means the understanding and logic related to, that's not abandoned, but it does not take priority in tasting the Harikatha. I'll give an example. If someone makes halava, right, they have to have the grains, they'll need water, they will need a sweetener, they will need whatever, if you want to make blueberry halava, you'll have blueberries or whatever kind of halava you want to make, you'll have that ingredient. So when you'll obviously have to have butter, right, or ghee or something. So when you make your halava, right, all these ingredients go into it. There's also a cooking time for each thing. There's also a methodology, how long the grain should be cooked, what color they should be, the water should boil, the sweetener should be added to the water. So there's so many things involved in it, right? But if you offer the finished product of your halava to someone and they sit down to honor that halava and they taste it and it's, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. This is the best halava. That experience that they have is not dependent on having understood the whole process of how the halava was made. You understand? So Sastra Yukti is like that. It is like the process, how halava is made, everything, and so forth, so on. Right? So understanding the vichar of how something comes about. Right? So in the same way that you're tasting halava, when ruchi arises, when we've come to the platform of nishta first, because nishta will mean there's not so much pramad. Pramad means like so much distraction, oscillation, and so forth of the mind, and the mind can be fixed under the influence of the practice of your bhajan life, and now it's become steady. When you hear Harikatha on that platform, then the effect of that Harikatha can manifest itself. At that time, naturally, swabhavically, ta lobat utpatti lakshanam, the quality of lobe or greed arises naturally. Right? And therefore, when you hear Harikatha with Sambandha Gyan and greed has arisen naturally, a very sweet taste comes. And then on the platform of Ruchi, a great appreciation for bhajan life takes place. So at that time, one begins to feel a natural, spontaneous devotional service. You understand? They begin to feel a natural, spontaneous devotional service, a natural attraction. Unlike when we first come and we're following the process under the influence, well, I know this is good for me. Right? Just like taking a medicine. I know this will make me healthy. I know this will be good for me. I know this will help me get away from sinful life. I know this will help me get out of the suffering of the material world. I know this will help me to get rid of my anarthas, etc., etc. Now, the predominant influence is the inherent taste in bhajan life. Oh, having chanted Harinam for some time, and having made deep attempt to purify our service to Harinam. Harinam is pure, but we want to purify our mood of service towards Harinam, right? Because Harinam itself, Purna Suro Nitya Mukto, right? It is always completely pure and always completely free from any material influence, but we are ourselves becoming fit to serve Harinam, which is non-different from Radha and Krishna. So now that Harinam begins to taste very sweet. Daily, I cannot do without it. If I am unable to, for some reason, take Harinam, then I don't feel proper, right, throughout the day. And Harinam and Harikatha are only complete when they are related to each other, right? Srila Bhaktivinoda Saraswati Thakur said Harinam is incomplete without Harikatha. Harikatha, in fact, is the Swarup of Harinam. Harinam is Shri Radha Krishna directly. But the Swarup, the inner revelation of how Harinam is Radha and Krishna and their Leela and everything else, will only come by hearing Harikatha. Understand? So, this is a little bit of an insight into a long, elongated description of how our Srila Prabhupada, and hence many of our contemporary acharyas, because they utilized the books of our Srila Prabhupada, understood the concept and the context under which the English translation of Raganuga Bhakti was given as spontaneous devotional service. So I was just trying to make clear factually what that meant. That it was not like we think in our regular scope of life as we know it in the Western world. Spontaneous is something that happens automatically and so forth, so on. No, here spontaneous devotional service meant essentially understanding first that we are practicing Raganuga Bhakti, right, in some stage or another, right? In the stage prior to Ruchi, primarily it is called Raganuga Pravritti. At the stage of Nishta, coming into Ruchi, at that time when greed arises, that tendency to follow spontaneously or swabhavically based on the natural and spontaneous attraction to bhajan becomes prominent, and therefore it can actually be called Raganuga Sadhana at that point, and then into a Shakti in which now the shift from this spontaneous or swabhavic deep attraction to bhajan becomes now focused on the object of bhajan or bhajaniya, right? That is called Ashakti. And then Sura Sattva Visheshatma Prem Suyamsa Samyabha Ruchi Bish Chittamasranya Kirasoba Vuchite. Then Swarup Shakti will descend. At that time, we will come into Bhavavast, and there's revelation of the actual substantive reality of our Swarup, and therefore we can practice in earnest as Srila Rupa Goswami Pad has written, Seva Sarika Rupena and Siddha Rupena Chatrahi. So it's in that stage when Bhavavastas come, there's some revelation of Swarup, and now with revelation of that Swarup, we can serve the associates on the transcendental platform as Rup Manjari, etc. Like this. So this was, I was going to go over a few other words like constitutional position, etc., but I'll save that for another day because this kind of took a little longer than I thought, and I have another call to make for one, and also have some other things to do. Again, I've always availed myself to filling in corrections here because most of the time I'm doing, just from memory and everything here, so verses, everything get mixed and all these kind of things. So, but I'm sure any senior devotees, they can put the corrections in, and that way we'll all be benefited like that. So thank you so much, devotees, for listening to these things and for allowing me to not have to write extensively back and forth with questions and answers, but giving me permission to do the questions in this format. Jai Vancha Kalapaturubhyascha Kripa Shindubheva Cha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Radhe Radhe.